So this is one of the biggest things that's being missed, is that if you were to ground couple your cooling and store that energy in the ground, you can halve the carbon of cooling, where they store the waste heat from refrigeration in the summer and use it to heat in the winter.
Hello and welcome to Rethink What Matters, the podcast dedicated to aligning the economy with the ecology and everyone for improved business performance, stronger families and a greener, cooler planet. And today I'm going to be talking with Neil Lawson of lowcarbonfarming.co.uk. And we're going to be talking about something every one of us should be using, and that's heat pumps. So yeah, great to be speaking with you about heat pumps because, you know, there's some kind of miracle device, aren't they? It generates something like 400% efficiency. So definitely interested to learn more about that. And I went to lowcarbonfarming.co.uk, your website, and it says here, the way we produce food needs to become more sustainable and less damaging. With this in mind, the low carbon farming team set out to improve greenhouse heating systems to meet this challenge, and in doing so created a world first.
Well, a little bit of background about that story. It all comes from walking down the river behind me one day and noticing some ducks enjoying a swim on an area that was slightly steaming, which got my interests going. So I followed the little stream that they were on, which was a little tributary into the Thames, followed it up to its source, and it arrived at the Oxford sewage treatment works. So literally knocked on the door, asked what it was about, learned a bit more, or was invited in officially to learn a bit more about their process. And a quick fag packet calculation while I was there, there was around enough heat to heat 15,000 homes just being discharged into the river. So this was a plentiful source of heat that every city would have through its water recycling centres. So you basically take all the raw sewage and rainwater, goes into a sewage treatment works, and it comes out as clean water which is discharged into the river. That clean water has a heat value. So it's anywhere between 9 and 25 degrees centigrade depending on the time of year, and that's a very abundant source of energy for a water source heat pump. So took that idea, looked for something which was a large demand, and that was seen as greenhouses. Building them local to cities would be good for food miles or transport miles, rather than we currently ship things in from Morocco and southern Spain. And the idea went from there. So the world first aspect of it was taking waste heat from clean water discharge into a river and using that in a heat pump. When I do a show or a panel discussion, one of my favourite questions is hands up who's got a heat pump. 2 or 3 people put their hand up. Okay. And I enjoy pointing out that everyone has a heat pump. It's the fridge in the kitchen. That is fundamentally a heat pump.
And I think if you put your hand behind your fridge, it's pretty warm back there. Are there other areas of industry?
Every city has a housing need, it has a schooling need, it has a heat need. So anywhere you require heat, it's applicable.
So this sounds too good to be true in a way. All this heat that's out there that's going to waste, and we can turn it into usable heat. What are the challenges in doing this then?
It's actually recognising the opportunities. A heat pump, in the heat pump cycle, the refrigerant boils at -20. So anything that's warmer than -20 is a useful heat to us. The warmer the better. The joy of the sewage treatment works was it was between 9 and 25 degrees C, so you get very efficient heat pumps. But we just need to look around us. Power stations got huge cooling towers, which are pumping out steam, although thermal power stations are less and less these days. Data centers are being built everywhere. They have to cool their processes inside. So they do that by rejecting heat.
You mentioned -20. Anything over -20? That's pretty much everywhere, isn't it?
It is. Hence heat pumps work in sort of Scandinavia where their temperatures are very cold, even an air source heat pump. It's the heat pump
Right.
cycle is a quirk of physics. We harvest low-grade heat by boiling a
Okay.
refrigerant, turning it from a gas to a liquid, and then compressing that. So turning it from a liquid to a gas, and then compressing that gas again back into a liquid. And the byproduct of that compression cycle is heat, which is what we harvest to do space heating or hot water heating.
I need to just I try and think about that a little bit more. I know you can't get. It's not possible to get some more out than you put in, no matter how clever the technology. What's actually happening here?
Well, if we talk about the efficiency and we hear words of 400% or 500%, but actually that efficiency is the
Yeah.
ability of the heat pump to turn 1 kilowatt of electricity, which is used by the compressor, which is compressing maybe 3 kilowatts of low-grade heat, which have been harvested from the surroundings outside around us, whether it be water
Right.
or air or a waste heat from somewhere else. So it's 1 kilowatt of electricity plus 3 kilowatts of low-grade heat, which is free, and that generates 4 kilowatts
Okay.
of useful heat. So that's where the 400% efficiency comes from.
But if you've got something that's say at -10, what can that become?
The efficiency of a heat pump is its ability to take the low grade temperature and turn it into a high grade temperature. So if, for example, you have air at minus
Right.
10, which we do in winter, to
Yeah.
produce 50 degrees centigrade into your radiators, the heat pump or the compressor is having to lift it from minus 10 to plus 50. So it's a 60-degree lift, and
Yeah.
those efficiencies will be
Yeah.
closer to 200%. Hence, the warmer
Okay.
our waste heat, the more efficient the system.
Are there other examples you could give us of where heat pumps have been, used to great effect?
Yeah, so we are used to heat pumps for cooling. Perversely, every office or building has a gas boiler for heating and a heat pump for doing cooling. But that
Yeah.
same heat pump could do both heating and cooling. So they're seasonal.
Right.
So we just have to challenge the status quo or the norm of the building services engineers who are very used to specifying gas boilers and heat pumps to make them think about air source, which can do both, or even ground source. The challenge with air source
Right.
is we are venting our waste energy into the atmosphere, into the air, and waving goodbye to it. If we were to employ ground source, we're capturing that waste heat and we're storing it in the ground for the opposing season. So if we use our
Right.
heat pump in summer to cool down our building and we put the waste heat into the ground, it's then there and available for winter when
Yep.
we want it for heating. So this is one
Right.
of the biggest things that's being missed is people talk about the decarbonisation of heat because we're used to fossil fuels. But if you were to ground couple your cooling and store that energy in the ground, you can halve the carbon of cooling or the cost of cooling, which is something that's been done
Right.
successfully in supermarkets, such as Sainsbury's. They installed around 30 of their supermarkets with ground source heat pumps, where they store the waste heat from refrigeration in the summer and use it to heat in the winter.
Hmm.
Their biggest benefit or cost
Okay.
benefit
So
was the fact that they halved their cooling costs.
presumably it's quite an expensive exercise, though, quite capital intensive. Maybe less easy for private residences, people at home to implement.
Well, if we talk about the challenge and the capital expenditure, we're talking about a ground source heat pump or a water source heat pump, and your energy is very local. It could be under the house, it could be under the building, it could be in the river next door. What it needs is
Right.
investment from someone like government to start communal collectors getting together where we can share heating and cooling. So we talk about district heat schemes.
Right.
We currently have a third
Yep.
generation district heat scheme is the burning of fossil fuels to generate heat. A fourth generation is a mixture of fossil fuels and low carbon, so a mix of a heat pump and a gas
Hmm.
boiler. A fifth generation is an ambient heat network or a condenser loop. So this is a pipe full of
Right.
water effectively that could be anywhere, it could be around 10, 20 degrees centigrade, and it's sufficient for people who
Hmm.
need heat to absorb heat from it and those who need cooling to reject heat into it. So this is where you start to join the
Hmm.
various users together and suddenly your efficiencies, if 1 kilowatt of electricity into a compressor can generate 4 kilowatts of heat, at the same time it generates 3 kilowatts of cooling. So suddenly you've got an efficiency of 700%.
Right. Okay. So what's the what are the the problems in take-up here then? Is it just that
So
alternatives, although less efficient, are just cheaper?
gas is cheap. We've had it since England converted from Towns gas to North Sea gas from the 70s onwards. So we're talking about a whole new technology.
Right,
So that investment that went into the gas main and gas infrastructure now needs to be put into
right,
a communal collector or fifth generation heat network. Then suddenly a heat pump as a
right,
box will come down in price as
right.
volume goes up. And if we can get it to the point where we just
Okay.
connect to the pipes in the road like a gas boiler, suddenly it's like for
Yeah.
like. But that asset in the ground
So,
has a 60 plus year
mhm,
lifespan. Yeah, so we talk about heat and people think of hot water or 65 degrees centigrade, and that's what we have to store. But if we're to store a low grade
yeah,
heat at maybe 20 degrees, that actually takes the pressure off the grid. Because in winter, when you need your
right,
heating most, your base temperature of 20 degrees is a lot warmer than your air source heat pump that's trying to harvest from something like -8. And thermal mass
right.
should be at a building level. So a building is built of bricks and mortar and has a thermal mass to it.
Okay,
So you all don't need to come
okay.
home and turn your heating on at 6 o'clock and hit that big peak. It's now all about matching supply and demand, removing those peaks and
Hmm.
reducing our generation costs.
I was speaking with the university earlier today, and yeah, so they're looking at smart heating and distributed heating, and looking at heat pumps too. And they mentioned aqua heat pumps, using the water in the ground as opposed to the ground. Is that a third type of heat pump, or is that just ground source by another another
No, we would call
definition?
that a water source. So if you take London, for example, it's built on a huge chalk aquifer. So if you drill down 65 meters in
Right.
central London or so, you get into a big lake. And actually that water
Yeah.
level is rising and starting to threaten the underground. So there have been a lot of studies on dewatering the underground. And there's, as an example, there is
Okay.
passive cooling of Green Park Tube Station, which are wells drilled near the tube station, extracting water from the aquifer, going through heat exchangers to cool the tube, and then discharging back into the aquifer again. There's about 1.8 megawatts worth of waste heat there that could be used by an adjoining building.
So if we're just thinking about a company that's maybe a data center, then what could they look for to see if heat pumps could work for them?
So a data center probably already has a heat pump, but they call it a chiller. So it's currently doing their chilling and it's
Right.
venting all the energy into the atmospheric air. But the people who design and build data centers are very precious about a tried and tested system. They're very reluctant to try something new.
Right.
So here we need to challenge
It's
that.
mission critical, I should imagine. Yeah, you don't want those. You
Yes,
don't want those computers to cook. Yeah.
exactly.
Maybe a different example then.
There was an article in the Telegraph a few days ago about due to the sudden heat wave, they're having to fire up some coal-fired power stations to produce enough electricity to provide people with cooling as the air conditioning systems come on.
Right.
So going back to the example of heating
That's
and
mad, isn't
cooling,
it? That's crazy.
it
Yeah.
is mad. If you had stored your waste coolth from winter in the ground, you could now be using it passively. And passively means you're not running a compressor, you're just
Right.
running a circulation pump and bringing up water in the ground that's, say, 5 or 6 degrees centigrade, and that's more than capable of cooling a building,
Right.
whether it be a domestic property or a commercial building. So in the UK, there's an aspiration to have 600,000 heat pumps installed a year by 2028. Our biggest challenge today for domestic heating is the spark gap. So the cost of electricity
Hmm.
is more than 4 times the cost of gas. Therefore, your heat pump has to be more than
Right.
400% efficient. The cheapest type of heat pump is an air source, and a lot of funded systems going in are air source heat pumps. They use the boiler upgrade scheme, which is
Right.
a £5,000 grant, but it's going to cost them more to heat their
Yep.
homes. If they get an efficiency of 250%, it's going to cost them a third more to heat their homes. And when utility bills have gone through the roof, very few people can afford that extra
Hmm.
currently.
And what about on the maintenance side of things? Is it quite costly to maintain?
There are very few moving parts. If you look at an air source heat pump, you have a compressor and you have a fan
Right. Yeah.
and a an expansion valve. In a ground source heat pump, you'll have a compressor and a circulation pump on the ground side. So very few moving parts.
Right.
So the longevity of a ground source heat pump is potentially 25 years. Of an air source heat pump, anywhere between
Right.
10 and
Okay.
15. That depends on its location. Is it near the seaside? Is the salt corroding the fins? Are there leaves on trees around? And that sort of thing.
Right. Okay. So it sounds like then that it's from a maintenance perspective not overly complicated or difficult to take care of. Everything's not buried in the ground somewhere, and you've got to dig it up, every 10 years or whatever. So it's
But
accessible.
yes, very very accessible. In
It's
fact,
all yeah.
yeah one of the things about ground source heat pumps is very much a hidden and discrete technology. So it is buried in the ground, but you're just pumping a fluid around the ground.
Okay. Okay. But the domestic market, you mentioned there are some targets there, but they're not going to be able to. I mean, people I don't have the money to buy them in, and implement them at the moment. So yeah, so there's definitely some work to be done, isn't there, to get people to actually start taking up heat pumps domestically.
Yeah, if we look at somewhere like Jersey, their energy tariffs are, they have a heat pump tariff, which is 12 pence per kilowatt hour for electricity, and their gas is 18 pence per
Yeah.
kilowatt hour. So if you look at the efficiencies, if it's a 4 to 1, it's going to cost them 3 pence per kilowatt hour for their
Yeah.
useful heat from their heat pump. And if it's 18 pence for gas and it's 90% efficient, it's going to be about 20 pence per kilowatt hour for useful heat from their gas boiler. So suddenly you can get a payback in your heat pump.
Right. Just explain the spark gap again, please.
So we look at the
That's
cost of
it's the
electricity.
difference between the gas and the electricity price. I think you said.
Yeah, exactly that. So currently electricity is more than 4 times more expensive than gas. But perversely, our electricity price is driven by the price of gas because we're very reliant in our centralized grid on using
Mhm.
gas peaking plant to make up the difference. And we
Right.
also have
Right. Right.
the
Yeah.
green
I hear you.
levies. The green levies were put onto the electricity
Right.
price, whereas now they
Okay.
should be
Okay.
put onto gas to decarbonise.
Yeah. So I mean, so we've really talked a lot about how to implement and how they work and how applicable they are. But we're really being driven here by the environmental side of things because environmentally they're much better, aren't they? They're not producing lots of CO2 and nitrogen. And so what's the
So
environmental footprint like for heat pumps?
at point of use for a heat pump, there are no emissions. You can have them in a house, there's no CO2,
Hmm.
there's no carbon dioxide, there's no NOx, as
Yep.
you say. There is an argument that
Yep.
we're quite reliant on gas and potentially coal at the moment. So there's a very good app called Grid Carbon, which you can log into, and
Yep.
you can see what the grid carbon
Hmm.
content or the carbon content of the grid is at an instantaneous moment in time. If you go back to the first months of COVID, there were satellites in space
Yep.
that could monitor CO2 and greenhouse gases, and the cities were just clearing.
Right.
And that's a lack of use predominantly from cars and vehicles, but gas boilers are the same.
Yeah.
They do produce CO2.
And heat pumps are a big part of low carbon farming then because they're so efficient, because they're taking heat which already exists, using that to heat the greenhouses. If I've understood this correctly, there are no carbon, there are no toxins coming out of it, no climate warming gases, CO2 and the rest of it. So are heat pumps and low carbon farming, these two are made for each other, are they?
They are, especially in this country. A lot of our tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers are imported from Spain and Morocco and Portugal. And actually,
Yep.
by importing from there, we're exporting a drought. We have a huge rainfall in this country. In our two greenhouses, all the rain we capture off the roof, we store in reservoirs, and we use to water the plants. So we're not importing any water. There is actually a need for CO2 to feed the plants for the photosynthesis cycle,
Right.
and we do that by using CHP gas engines, but we pump all the CO2 from the exhausts into the greenhouses to feed the plants. We mustn't
Right.
forget that heat pumps
Okay.
also run on electricity.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think we have to. There have to be two separate conversations. I think we have to separate the efficiency of taking the energy and converting it into whatever we want versus the sourcing of the energy. So if you plug one of these heat pumps into a wind turbine or a solar panel, then we've got what we want. Then I think, haven't we? We've got something which is completely clean.
Exactly that. I mean, the village where I am here, we developed and built the largest hydro on the Thames in our little village, which we then crowd-funded out of the local area. So we got 440 kilowatts of
Right.
hydro in the river, which runs pretty much all the time.
Yeah.
So we could heat and cool and generate electricity for our village out of the river with absolute zero carbon. That's one of the best examples of
Brilliant.
potentially a utopia.
That's fantastic. Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, that's actually, we need to start using this utopia word a little bit more often, because we need to be heading towards a good vision here. How many people or houses is that looking after?
Sadly, we're not doing it because the electricity goes into the grid and gets lost. But on paper, there's no reason why we couldn't. So
Okay.
with 1,000 people, 500 houses. Actually, the Sanford-on-Thames, or the mill, used to be the paper press for Oxford University. So it was a mill generating its
Right.
power from the river.
There must be quite a lot of loss, though, in putting that energy into the grid. So it's got to go travel down the wires and then get sent off into various different locations. So I should imagine quite a bit of it gets lost in the process of distribution, transmission.
I think it gets
I don't
used
know.
locally. The biggest loss is actually we
Okay.
sell the electricity for 5.5 pence per kilowatt hour, and I have to buy it 400 meters
Yeah.
away for 34 pence per kilowatt hour. So I think I suffer the biggest loss, which goes to
Right.
the big
Yes.
six.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we want to get this message out there. So you could do a lot more if you got more, yourself. And you and your business could do a lot more if you got more of that money. And which countries are we, looking to for inspiration here? Are we leading the world with this? I think you mentioned Germany or Scandinavia, or who's ahead of the curve here with, I don't know, heat pumps or low carbon farming.
So if we look at heat pumps, definitely Scandinavia. Their heating oil prices were at petrol
Right.
pump prices. So they've been incentivized since the 50s to make their homes efficient. Not only thermally efficient, but also
Hmm.
the use of heat pumps and electricity. So a lot of the challenges that we think are stumbling blocks, they've overcome. And we need to be looking to them and taking note of what they do. So we talk about the grid can't support all
And
of these heat pumps, but every house in Sweden
right.
has a 16 amp three-phase supply, which is about twice the size of what we have here. But on their heat pump, they have a monitor.
Right.
So if the cooker's on and the freezer's on and the washing machine's on, then the heat pump holds off. For all of
Yeah.
5, 10 minutes, you're not going to see the house go cold in that time. And that
Right.
just stops you drawing or
Okay.
removing the peak. So these are the this is what a smart meter should have
Right.
been
Okay.
for. Sadly, we have installed a whole
Right.
network of dumb meters.
Okay. But that's been corrected, I think, isn't it? Because you hear a lot about smart meters today.
Smart meters are good for the utilities to remotely read your bill, but they haven't taken them any further. I
Okay.
remember a Tomorrow's World
All right.
program, if you remember that, back in the
Of
70s.
course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they had a program where you could have an intelligent meter that could turn your fridge on and off, turn your freezer on and off, and your washing machine and things like that, and control what's going on with your grid. Sadly, that
Right.
never happened.
So, from your perspective, then, Neil, in your customers and your clients and the clients that you'd like to have, are there smaller budgets that you work with, or domestic? Just give us a bit of a feel who your typical clients are, and
So
if somebody was looking to work with you after this.
currently we don't have a typical client. We work from domestic all the way up to commercial. There's a lot of investment in the public sector decarbonisation scheme. We're involved with that. We
Hmm.
work as assessors for Salix, so we review the bids. We also do feasibility studies for clients, and we'll do detailed design for contractors. One of the gaps I identified in the market was there are a lot of people out there who can weld pipe, fit pipe, drill holes and things like that. But what was really missing is the in-depth knowledge of applying a heat pump. So we have a design team of
Right.
7 engineers who are probably the most experienced in terms of years within the country, and have a huge, not only do we
Hmm.
design, but we have experience of installation, commissioning, operating, running and servicing heat pumps. So happy
Okay.
to talk to
Okay.
anyone who is considering their energy, has heating loads and cooling loads,
Right.
and is serious about doing something, not just offsetting, buying a bit of forestry in the Amazon.
Yeah, I know this whole offsetting thing is. Yeah, we've got to try and not offset, basically. Or offset as little as possible, haven't we? Brilliant. All right, I really appreciate your time, Neil, on this podcast. It's been really insightful. We've learnt a lot. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you? Where should they go? Which should they go
If
to
you're looking,
lowcarbonfarming.co.uk?
or Geoenergy Design, or geoenergy.co.uk.
Once again, thanks very much, Neil.
No problem. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.